Welcome to the Find My Catalyst podcast. We all have problems we're looking to solve. We know that there's solutions out there, but we struggle with this. Today's catalyst is Jen Allen. She is the chief evangelist at Challenger and the host of Winning the Challenger Sale podcast. This episode is brought to you by the Catalyst Sale Game Plan. It's our approach to goal setting and execution. Head to catalystsale.com/game for more information. Let's get to the conversation. Jen, it is awesome to finally meet. We've had some back and forth after when I think Jeff Bajorek commented on something, and that's what ended up getting us connected together. And then I did a Throwback Thursday video on Challenger, and one thing led to another. And here you are on the podcast. Thank you for joining.
Thank you so much for having me. I love how the universe just brings us together.
So what is an evangelist?
Great question. I think evangelist kind of conjures up that person that's like in front of the Sunday service and, getting everybody in passion, which is not what I do. To me, evangelism is really going out and educating the market on the conventional wisdom that's leading them to make decisions that aren't in their best interest. So if I think about sales is out there trying to close deals, marketing is out there trying to promote our products and services, evangelists sort of sit in between that. And we're not out there saying, hey, buy our training or buy our whatever. We're out there saying, here's a different take on this problem you've just thought was a cost of doing business. And we engage in really thoughtful, kind of insight-led conversations online, in person, through different, groups and associations with the explicit idea of generating demand with the right type of customer that your company wants to attract.
So, and a lot of that aligns with Challenger in general, probably not the way that people think of Challenger when they pick up the book. What are maybe two of the biggest misconceptions people have about Challenger? And but let's go backwards. What is Challenger?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, not everybody knows Challenger. So Challenger was a book that was authored. The research was done back in 2009 when the economy was just sort of falling apart. The book came out, I think, in 2012. But essentially the idea at the time was, look, like the economic crisis happened, and then suddenly people that were star sellers weren't stars anymore. And sales leaders were looking at their sales teams and saying, I don't know what the right recipe for success is anymore because the world is completely blown up and what worked yesterday no longer works today. So they turned to what was at the time a company called Corporate Executive Board, or CEB. It was now acquired by Gartner a few years ago. And they said to the sales practice, look, help us figure this out. Like, we don't want to we don't want to do it like a guessing game to figure out what we should be teaching our sellers to do. And so what the company did is we went out and we did what has been the largest study since Neil Rackham's, original study of sellers, to understand in practice, what are high performers doing? Not like everybody gets in a room and says, I think they're great at negotiation and I think they're great at discovery, but really looking at what are sellers doing in practice and then isolating that. So if I'm a head of sales, if I'm a CEO, if I'm a founder, I can go out there and with confidence say, look, I'm not going to give you a script or give you a robotic motion, but I'm going to say there's a mindset that is more likely to make you successful today when you encounter X, Y, and Z. And so essentially, like for those that haven't read the book, what we found is that skills and profiles just kind of clustered together and we just named them. So you've got your, hard workers, which are your people that are your first ins and their last outs, and they always hit their activity metrics and everything's kind of a math game in their mind. You've got the relationship builders who are the people that believe that we win business because of our individual likability. I will fully attest, I used to be one of these people. I'm going to show up. I'm going to bring the energy. I'm going to be nice. I'm going to ask about their kids, right? Like it's the person to person relationship. Then you've got your problem solvers. This is really common in like engineering led or SME led organizations where you just want to like solve the problems for the customers post sales because you don't really want to hunt. So you can convince yourself you're providing a lot of value that way. And then you have your lone wolves who we have no idea what they're doing. When they're doing well, we let them sit. When they're not, it's easy to manage them out. And then you have your challengers, right? And your challengers are the debaters of the world. They are just very intellectually curious. Like they look at a customer's business and they start to sort of figure out, why are they doing this? And what is the assumption underneath that? And what information are they using to make that decision? And so they bring that curiosity to calls. And because they're just naturally curious, they're unafraid to question why a customer does something a certain way. They're not thinking about, is this person going to like me or not? Their goal is, how do I make this customer's business better? And so that's the lens they look through. So those 5 different profiles, when you line them up, each of them has a different likelihood to be a top performer. And it just ended up that challengers were the most likely to be a top performer and relationship builders were the least likely. So we can get into all that a little bit more, but essentially for anyone who hasn't read the book, that's your 2-minute Challenger cliff notes.
So what are the common mistakes that people who haven't read the book, but have picked it up and maybe not only have picked it up, but they've picked it up and they've distributed it to a bunch of other people?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think the first mistake people make is they read the title. They think Challenger means go be a jerk to your customers, and they just get it so very wrong. But what I would say is, look, if you're running an organization, you're a founder, you're a head of sales, whoever you are, and you think that by virtue of handing a book to someone, it's going to fundamentally change their mindset and the words that come out of your mouth, then you probably haven't spent enough time with sellers, right? Because we as sellers hold very sacred what we say to customers. And it's an uphill climb to get me to convince me that I need to say different things. I need to do different things. I need to think different things, because that is essentially my recipe for how I win. And so it's like, there's an analogy we use all the time, which is if I wanted to learn how to fly a plane, I would never just read a pilot's manual and hop in that pilot seat, right? It's not enough. I have information, I have knowledge, but I don't have enough to know and feel with confidence how to change my behavior. And the thing with us salespeople is if I change my behavior and it doesn't work, that's less money in my pocket. That's a customer who thinks less of me. So the stakes are really, really high, which is why I always kind of shudder. I mean, it's nice to see the Challenger book get distributed because that's a big reason why the name is so familiar to many people. But I think it does a massive disservice to reps in the organization.
Yeah. And it's not like you can read a book and stay at a Holiday Inn Express and then all of a sudden be ready to go. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
So there are 3 kind of broad components of Challenger. And I know and I'll include a link to an episode that I did a while back where I'm going to break down Challenger and talk a little bit about the difference between methods and process and systems and work through that. The 3 points are teach, tailor, and take control. And then I've modified take control to lead. But so teach, tailor, and take control. Why are these 3 things important for challengers to do, or sales professionals, business owners, people who are going out and trying to deliver something into the market? Why is it important for us to look at this in the context of teach, tailor, and take control?
Yeah. And so I will also say, like, there's a 4th on that list that the book did not cover. And frankly, I think it is one of the most important tenets of Challenger. And we refer to that as constructive tension. And I don't know if they didn't cover it because it was 2 words instead of 1. I don't know. But if you look at these tenets, the reason these 3 skills combine and are important is because when we think about the psychology of a buyer today, right? Like, let's say I'm selling a SaaS solution. I may have a better mousetrap for my customer, right? I may be able to look them in the face and say, here's the ROI and here's the upside of doing this. And here's all the reasons you should stop working in a spreadsheet and start using our solution. And that customer will look me dead in the face and agree with me. And they'll nod their head. They'll give me all the signals I've been taught to look for. But then when I hang up that phone, here's what happens. That buyer goes back to their desk and they start thinking, well, what if I buy this thing and my team thinks it's dumb and then I look stupid for buying it? Or what if I build a business case for this and I bring it to my CFO or my boss and they're like, are you nuts? We're like in cost containment mode. Or what if this is actually not the best solution? Maybe I should look at 6 others to make sure that this is the right one. And what happens is we as buyers start talking ourselves out of things, right? And what we as sellers were often taught to do, and I was taught this early in my career, is go back to the value, go back to the benefits, go back to if you do this, then this will happen. The problem is with that equation is that we as humans make stupid decisions all the time, right? Like for a while, like work got busy. I stopped going to the gym. I didn't have a heart attack. So I just kept not going. I have all the information in the world that tells me if I go, I'll sleep better, less anxiety, like feel better about myself, but I still didn't go. It is the same thing with our buyers. If we constantly tell someone, if you do something, this will happen, it's not like we're met with disagreement. It's usually, yes, but it's price, it's timing, it's, other priorities and all these other things that come out. And so when you look at the skills of Challenger, the reason these are so effective when combined is because we're teaching sellers like myself that you don't win someone over by selling the upside. You win someone over by teaching them, you think that what you're doing, we'll call that your status quo.
Yep.
You think your status quo is good enough, right? You're waking up every day, business is going, maybe you get some hurdle points, maybe some things are hard, but you're getting by. Until I, as a seller and the buyer, are aligned and look at my current state in the same way, where the buyer's like, whoa, my house is on fire and I'm just turning an eye, you're never going to get that customer to appreciate the value. And so I think when I think about teach is not about teach your stuff. Teach is, what do you have to teach that customer that they don't currently appreciate about their business that's costing them? Taylor is saying, I don't take that same story and just robotically tell it to every customer who walks in my door. I got to consider the unique customers, like business circumstances, their goals, what they want to achieve, and tie that into the narrative. Take control, meaning, and I like that you said lead, because I think that's a really valid point. Like many sellers take a back seat. So I've done my job. I've given you the vision as to why to act. Yeah. Now you tell me how you want to buy, right? We got to coach our buyers. It's hard to buy right now. And then constructive tension is the last one. This is the one that, like, when I heard it, I was like, man, I never do this.
Yep.
Constructive tension is, I can tell you the right story. I can give you all the reasons to change. But we as humans want to squirm out of that, right? Like, I want to know that what I'm doing, I can get by doing, because that means I don't have to spend money, risk political capital, so on and so forth. So constructive tension is, I tell the customer a story about their business, something they're doing today that's costing them. And then I turn up the heat. It's not a person-to-person attack. It's not being a jerk. It's not, how could you let this happen in your business? We lead with empathy, but we also let that person know every day, every week, every year, you let this problem fester. This is how big it's getting, right? And this is why you see such a stark difference between relationship builders and challengers. Because relationship builders, remember, we are wired to make that customer happy. I want you to feel safe. I want you to feel good. I want you to feel warm and fuzzy. Versus challengers, I don't care if you feel, I want you to feel uncomfortable, because when we are uncomfortable as humans, that's when we do things.
One of the things that jumps out at me as you went through this, and I completely missed the piece on constructive tension, which means I just need to go back in and listen to the book again and go through.
We didn't talk about it in the book.
but to have it pop, so it doesn't pop up at all in the book, or it doesn't, like, it's a theme that just is missed. Okay.
Yeah. It's hinted, but it's not explicitly defined, because we continue doing research on Challenger every single year. And so that's one of the reasons why the book is good, not great.
So I think one of the things that we struggle with as sales professionals, as business owners who are out there wanting to solve problems, is we think that we need to convince people to do things. And the word I like to use is compel. I prefer to compel people to take action. And this tension that you're talking about, revealing it so that now that tension is known. It's no longer an unknown tension. It's known, it's felt. And then the fire gets turned up so that I can feel the pain associated with it. Now I'm compelled to take action, because the risk of not taking action is greater than doing something. So really, really powerful stuff.
Yes. I love the difference between convince and compel. I am going to shamelessly steal that, Mike, and I will credit you, but I love it, because I think it is like, we are so often in sales just taught your job is to convince people of things. It's not. It's to provide information that they don't have today and help them make a decision in their favor. But we can't convince anybody to do anything. And I think it's overstepping the bounds of what we as sellers are sort of should be thinking we can do. And I will say, like, I keep using sellers because I myself am a seller, but I see just as many founders. I see just as many leaders making these same exact mistakes, because we get excited about what we can do. And it's understandable. I refer to Challenger as a mindset, because I literally still to this day have to remind myself, Jen, stop doing that. Stop talking about the solution. Stop talking about the upside. Like, build the pain before you do it. And it's like a hat I have to put on, because it's not natural for me.
Well, I want to get into some of the challenges that founders run into, but before we do that, so I think this is foreshadowing toward what we might talk about in a little bit. I want to dig into research, because you said the research continues, the research is ongoing. So how would you define research?
Yeah. So our research, and the way that we define it, is continuing to study buying behavior and seller behavior in response. And the reason that I think, like, even if you've read the Challenger sale, you don't have the latest story, is because even 2012 to today, massively different, right? Like one of the things I always cringe at is when I see people to refer to themselves as like a sales expert. Like buying and selling changes so freaking rapidly. Like how could you ever be an expert in something that's a moving target? And so we continue to study what makes buyers loyal. What are the reasons that deals don't close? Buyer psychology. What are sellers doing? What are things we taught 10 years ago that actually, we would go back and say, don't listen to that advice. Here's what we would say to do differently now.
But Jen, back in my day when I did, all we did was look at our Rolodex and we would go through and start dialing numbers. Come on, doesn't everybody just need a Rolodex today?
Dialing for dollars? I mean, I literally remember back when I was at CEP, like there was like one of those tanks that you step in and like when you made enough dials, like all this money would come up and you'd grab it. Like to think of operating in that anymore is wild. But the reality is that's how a lot of us grew up learning sales. And that's how a lot of leaders who are running organizations today grew up learning sales. And I think the farther we get from it, the farther we get from seeing what happens when you treat a customer that way, when you speak to them that way, it's easy to hold these conventional wisdoms and just say, no, it's all about the activity. Just go out there, pound the pavement, get our name out in front of as many people as possible. I get it. I get it because I was brought up that way too.
Well, and when you're naturally curious about something, about a topic, you tend to dig deeper. You get into a situation where you're continuously learning. You can look at that same topic with a beginner's mind approach, and you continue to either gather more information, advance your thinking on certain things. And if you're a founder inside an organization, you've likely started your business because you deeply care about something. You deeply care about a problem that maybe you had or somebody who was really important to you had, and you knew you could solve for. Then you go in and you wonder why the rest of the salespeople you bring on just can't sell the same way that you sell. So let's talk a little bit about founder magic, which I think is one of the things that hurts a lot of us out there. But let's talk about founder magic. How often do you see things like founder, or when I say the words founder magic, what comes to mind for you?
Yeah. So I think founder magic, that the immediate phrase that conjures up for me is a phrase that starts with, why can't you just, right? Why can't you just sell this? Why can't you just get people to take calls? Like it's an oversimplification that founders often have because of what you described, right? We are intimately involved with the vision and the development and everything. And so it's second nature for us. And I think often people just assume you get it. Like this team should get it and they don't get it and it's their problem and they need to figure it out, right? Like, and one thing you said that I would actually love to hear you define, because I love the way you put it. And I think it's an important thing on this topic, is you talked about a beginner's mindset. So like, what's a beginner's mindset to you?
Yeah. So the first time I heard someone say it was Barry Diller talked about it on the Masters of Scale podcast with Reid Hoffman. And he talked about it in the context of infinite learning. And infinite learning is just this loop of things are changing. Things that if I get caught into a trap of saying, this is known, this is what's going to happen, I start to put on these really big, and this is not on video, but blinders on. Maybe this needs to be the one on video. As I look with my hands out like this, these blinders on that keep me so focused on doing something this way. And once we do it that way, we create blind spots. And the only way to shift those blind spots is to shift perspective. And the only way to shift perspective, at least in my opinion, is by asking questions. And many times we struggle with asking ourselves those questions. So we lean on others to help us ask those questions. And that can start to shift perspective. So the view of a beginner's mind, infinite learning, from my standpoint, is that we don't know what we know until we know. And then when we know, we still need to keep asking so that we continue to keep learning. So just trying to look at things with a clean slate. And I can tell you this, it drives people nuts, because the most common feedback I get when we ask simple questions like who, what, why, where, when, how, the journalist approach, those journalist questions as we build a story is, well, we've already figured that stuff out. We just need more of it. Bull. If you figured it out, we wouldn't be having the conversation, right? Like you'd already be doing, unicorns and rainbows and all the other cool things. And you would have been able to move from founder-led sales to founder amplified to specialized and worked your way through the gate. And the challenge that I think a lot of founders run into, and a lot of people, even sales reps who are into their own way, is this is how we've done it. I know how to do it. I'm going to go through my process. And they get so focused on the process that they forget to think, which ultimately impacts the mindset piece that you were talking about. So thanks for the awesome question. You just pull the string back and I'll just go.
No, because the thing that I think is so ironic that founders often miss is that is the exact mindset of our customers, right? This is how I've always done it. This is what I do. Your shiny new object, cool, but I don't need to use it, right? And that I love the way you describe it, because that's what we're up against. We're up against someone who, in many cases, and I don't want to overgeneralize, there's certainly plenty of prospects I talk to who have a beginner's mindset and look at everything with like why do we do this way? But it's not the masses, right? I think they're few and far between. And so when you are selling to a person that doesn't have a beginner's mindset, you cannot just tell them, here's a different way of doing that and expect them to just jump on board. And I do think founders at times, because we are proud and excited of what we've created, they neglect that. And so we focus a lot on here's what the product can do, and here's the value, and here's how much better it is. And we fail to appreciate that the road to better, and I say this a lot, but the road to better is just littered with all of these things that are risky. And so buyers know that. And we have to remember, and I think some of the best founders, some of the best leaders, what I admire about them is they have exactly what you described in that beginner's mindset. They don't make assumptions. They don't feel like they question everything. And they say, well, why might a customer think this is a terrible idea? Why might a customer think that this is not urgent, instead of just assuming that they'll see it the way we see it?
And when you were talking earlier, you'd mentioned the importance of empathy. How can we, it's funny, it's one of these words. It's kind of like that scene in The Princess Bride where people use the word, but like inconceivable. You keep using that word, but I don't think you know what it means. If we use the word empathy, but we don't actually either know what it means or practice it. And if we just shift our perspective as business owners, as leaders inside businesses, as individual contributors who are successful in their roles. And in my first sales role, first account executive role, I had a mentor named Mike McCarg. He highlighted to me that I was a franchise owner. I owned my own franchise relative to my territory. I had to make good choices on where I spent resources and ideally get good return on the investment of those resources. And that is a mindset I've taken relative to territory management, operating a business since the beginning. It's tough because then you start to say, well, I want to do this. I want to play a little bit loose, but then now I've got to operate within the guidelines of the organization. We, as business owners, as leaders of our own territory, need to be comfortable with the idea of putting ourselves in the shoes of the customer, understanding the implication of change, understanding the impact of change. And if we're not really good at changing inside our own organization, what makes us think that our customers are going to be great at changing inside their own organization, which is where this constructive tension is really, really valuable. Because if I feel tension over and over again, like you were saying, the gym. So, hey, good. I stopped going to the gym. Still doing okay. Clothes kind of fit. I haven't had to put anything that I actually have to button on, or everything's got a little bit of elastic. So
you've been looking at my closet, Mike.
everything fits for a while, right? And then all of a sudden, now you've got to go to a meeting and I've got to throw on the suit jacket for whatever reason, or I've got to actually buckle a pair of pants. And you're like, the belt notch is a little bit different. Something has changed, but I didn't know that it changed. So these compelling events become really powerful when you can create that constructive tension. Really good stuff, Jen. This is awesome.
Yeah. And look, I love the way you talk about empathy. And here's why. I think when people pick up the Challenger sale, I don't know if it's I'm sure it's the title, right? We picked a provocative title. The original title was going to be The New Relationship Builder. Nobody would have read that book, right? People love and hate Challenger. Very few people are in between. But when people hear Challenger, they think I'm going to go in, be a jerk, be assertive, be like in your face to that customer. And that is a great way to be escorted out of an office if you're still doing live visits or have the connection be bad and the call end. How I think about empathy, and we'll play on this example of me not going to the gym, is if someone, when I had that moment where I tried to button my shirt and I couldn't, and someone came in and said, this is your fault. And how could you have let yourself get this? You've known that this is important for you to go to the gym and you didn't do it. What would I do? I would feel terrible about myself. I would feel terrible about that experience. I'd probably be in that mode where I'm beating myself up. versus someone who said, look, I get it. We just went through a crazy time and it was so difficult and we all lived in our sweatpants. And there's a reason why we all stopped going to the gym. And it's this, and this. But here's the good news, right? We know that we're in a state of pain right now. And we know that there's a better way. Like, let's have a conversation about how we get there. Because you would have been going to the gym already if it was just that easy, right? And I think that's how obviously I'm just playing out a personal example, but when I think about engaging with a client, right, I've seen some crazy messages that are like, I saw your organization shrunk by 5% last year. Like, why aren't you investing in your sales team? And I think, like, why would anybody want to respond to that? That's mean. It's not helpful, right? Like, we don't learn that way. And I think it's important to say, like, it's important to empathize with the customer when you're about to deliver constructive tension. Like, it's not necessarily your fault, right? Like, for a long time, what you were doing was good enough, or there's information or assumptions that underlie why we do the things we do, and they make logical sense to us, which is why we continue to do it. But here's the thing that's changed, or here's the thing that's different. So you don't point the finger at the person, you point the finger at the environment around that person and help them see, by admitting that I've got something wrong, it's not a mistake on my part. And you're not making that person feel inferior, inadequate, wrong. And I will say, by and large, that is one of the biggest mistakes. I had a client years and years ago, implemented Challenger. They had one of their reps go to one of their biggest customers and basically have a conversation that sounded like that negative scenario, and they lost them. And that is why it's so important that, like, we help sellers understand this is what it sounds like in practice. If you just give someone the book, like, they're left to their own conclusions. And that's a scary, scary thing, right? So that's one of the reasons why getting that constructive tension piece, leading with empathy, leading with intellectual curiosity, like, those are the things I think of when I think of a challenger, not someone who's mean and aggressive.
And don't lose sight of that point that Jen made around the challenge of having those kind of conversations in the wrong context with customers, where people start to apply a tool incorrectly and create more damage than they had intended. I was on the other side of that in a role a while back as account executive, had a conversation with one of the larger defense contractors that we had just started doing business with. And I found out that the reason they came to us was because the incumbent said, in a program review, I'm looking at all your data. You're underutilizing the program. You're doing all of these things wrong, this, that, the other thing. And the person responding goes, you know what, you're right. And now we're going to look at an alternative. And they moved to us. And it happens. And that's why I think we've got to be really careful as business leaders, as leaders of self, when we start applying these tools, make sure we apply those tools in the right context and continue to evaluate the data, continue to look at the data and say, is this working? What kind of feedback am I getting? Am I losing somebody? If we go through and we validate those things with folks, we'll start moving past assumptions. And this gets back into that piece Jen was talking about earlier with the research. We're always learning. We're conducting this research. We're gathering information, getting feedback, and then adjusting. The wrong tool applied in the wrong situation can create a crap load of damage. You do not want to see me with like hedge clippers or any of those other things. It's bad.
I don't know who said this initially, but it's like the saying goes, like, a fool with a tool is still a fool, right? Like, there's no easy plug and play for fixing a revenue problem or a sales problem, right? Like, you have to take the time to teach and unwind. And just like we're talking about with the gym or our customers, like, when we're thinking about how do we arm our people to go tell a story that fascinates customers, that pulls them in, that makes them want to talk to us more, we're up against the same things, right? Like, that's why when I talk about Challenger, I'm like, it's so fun to me, because I'm like, you start applying Challenger to win arguments with your wife. You start applying Challenger to, like, in your internal business partners, to help them see, like, you're asking me for stupid stuff that I shouldn't have to. But instead of saying that, you frame it in a way so that the focus is on them. And that's why I refer to it as a mindset. I don't necessarily think it's just a sales thing. I think as founders, we've talked a lot about this, but like, as founders, we really need to understand, why do our internal people do the things they do the way they do it? Why do our customers do things the way they do? And really start to take that beginner's mindset that you talked about and put ourselves in the shoes of those people to say, this is an option. It may not be the option that we want them to take because they're not buying our stuff, But why are all the reasons why status quo is acceptable? Until we understand and can empathize with that, we have no ability to relate to our customers and to break them down. We just start hammering them over the head with, this is why this is better. I think better is honestly one of the worst words in sales that I can think of. Other than
I want to get into the better piece because I think will be really interesting. But as you were describing that, one of the things that comes to mind is we get out there and we engage with customers, but we don't take the time to learn about the market. We don't take the time to understand each of our competitors out there. The competitive data that we look at is put together by people inside our organization to demonstrate how we're better than them. And now we go in without full context. Like, I know I am not the right solution for a lot of people out there. I am absolutely an acquired taste.
Same.
And over time, sometimes that acquired taste can get rotten because things can the relationship becomes so close that now we can be really direct. And sometimes people can be offended by that level of directness. But why do we struggle inside our own organizations with taking these same concepts and applying them back into our organization so that we can become better practitioners of this work and have better perspective so that we can actually have constructive tension discussions with our customers because we actually know we're experts. We've got all of the information. We can provide insight. We can, through the questions we ask, why do we struggle with this stuff internally? Shifting the lens over.
I love this question because I think it's really what a lot of people are up against. Like any big decision you as a company make, you will face this, right? And so one is, I think in general, there is often a fear of being vulnerable and saying, I don't know the answer to the question, right? And so that prevents us from really authentically looking at the problem and really understanding it. It might be like, hey, it makes me look bad in front of my boss, my peer, if I don't know the answer. But how many times are you in a meeting when someone's like, I actually just don't know. We're scared of it because it's a weakness, right? Or it's perceived as weakness. I think it's a strength. So I think that's one. I think two, there's plenty of organizations who are just driven by this idea that like our product, our solution is so great that everybody should buy it. And I love what you said around not everybody should work with me. I feel the same way. There are plenty of companies that just should not work with us. But if you set that tone, then the response from the organization is, how do I find a way to force a fit? There is no better way to waste time, money, resources, burn people out than trying to convince them to find a fit that isn't there. So I think that's two. And then the third one is, I think because you talked about this a little bit, but like as you get further and further along in your career, we start to take hypotheses, assumptions, beliefs, and then turn them into facts. And it's like, we don't really know when it happens, but over the way it happens. And then because I believe it's a fact, action it. And I make decisions off of it instead of reflecting and saying, this is actually a belief. Don't have any data, don't have any voice of customer to validate this. But because it's just become a fact somewhere along the way, and because I may be in a position of authority, others take my word for it. And that's why I think like, whether you call them challengers, whether you call them whatever, having people who work for you, and it's not my idea, but this is like something we classically talk about. Like if you have a bunch of head nodders around you, you are at best going to be as good as you as an individual could be, right? But if you've got people who question you and say, all right, I've heard you say that this is like, you've implied that this is a fact. I'm curious, like, how did you get there? And call that out. I think that's how we end up in these perpetual cycles of like, okay, now we're just in a do more strategy because we're unwilling to revisit the facts and beliefs and assumptions that underline why we do what we do. That's just my opinion on it.
Do you mean there are some organizations where the emperor might not be wearing clothes?
Lots of naked emperors out there.
It is. And what's fascinating. So I think that if you, as a leader inside your organization or a leader inside your territory or a leader for your team, wherever you are leading, periodically ask yourself this question: am I wearing clothes?
I love that.
And if you ask that question and you are absolutely certain that you're wearing clothes, it's time to start asking some other people in your organization, am I wearing clothes? And others outside of the organization, am I wearing clothes? And if you have a group of trusted advisors around you, you will get some powerful questions back from them that will help reveal the answer to you. It won't be, oh yeah, you're wearing clothes and they're absolutely awesome. And they're the most amazing clothes that I've ever seen in the entire world, because sometimes people just want you to feel good. And it feels good when you tell people their clothes are amazing, right? Recovering relationship person on the other end, Jen?
100%, right? It's like, I struggled with this for a long time, speaking up in internal meetings where I was listening and saying, boy, I don't really follow this logic or agree with this logic. It was hard for me because I didn't want to be disliked. And again, that is how I'm wired. I care a lot about being liked. I still do, if I'm being honest, but I have to like put that hat on and say, who cares about being liked if what you're all spending time building is garbage, right? Like, I would much rather be the unpopular person in the room if it means the outcome is going to be better for the customer, the outcome is going to be better for the company, the employee, whatever. And people rarely remember the moment when someone challenges you. Like, sometimes you do. What they remember is the thing successful or does it fail? And so I have to like coach myself, think about the finish line. Don't think about this moment right here, but it's everywhere. It's in internal conversations and external conversations. But I think the thing that like we didn't talk about in the book is you can spot a challenger in a customer interaction, but you can also really easily spot a challenger inside your company because they'll be the first person to throw their hands up. And instead of saying, I don't like this, this is bad, they'll ask a very thoughtful question and say something like, have you considered this? And it's that awkward, uncomfortable silence when everybody looks at each other and says, you know what? No, we didn't. And people don't like it in the moment. We don't like it because it's uncomfortable. But as long as the intentions are about a better outcome, I think that's where it's not, you can't do it and say like, well, I was the one who spotted it and I'm the one who's right. That's a great way to be like, don't invite her to those meetings anymore. But if it's like, if you focus in on the end outcome and you're really making it about, let's get to the best thing we can get. I think that's the difference between people who just want to be like the person who speaks up in every meeting and find flaws with everything we do.
And that's, you highlighted fit earlier. And if we struggle with asking these questions, it's really hard for us to identify fit. And where this becomes really, really difficult is where all of a sudden our agenda becomes more important than the agenda of the person on the other end, whether it's an internal customer or it's an external customer. At that point, we start to focus on short-term needs. We start to focus on things that we have to take care of in the near term rather than what are the long-term implications of what we're doing. And if you struggle with being able to focus on the long term, then you likely have a challenge with other things inside your business relative to cash flow, planning, distraction. There are a number of other things that are out there, and these are hard things to look at. It's hard to put that mirror up and look at it. It's hard to get other people to put that mirror up and look at it. Jen, absolutely awesome conversation.
I've learned so much from you. Like, I could nerd out on sales with you all day long. I love this. Thank you.
Jen, there is no better way to end this episode than what you just said. So rather than ask another question or add even more content and put my foot in my mouth, I'm just going to wrap things up and say, where can people find out more about what you're working on?
Yeah. So easiest place is on LinkedIn. I love LinkedIn. I share a lot of the things I've gotten wrong in my sales career. Jennifer Allen is my name, so you can easily find me. And then the other place is every week we do a podcast called Winning the Challenger Sale, where we take concepts in the book and just make them practical, right? Like, it's one thing to know, teach, tailor, take control, constructive tension. Great. How do I do that in a discovery call? How do I do that in a group meeting, in a negotiation? And so our attempt there is really to take high level theories in the book and break it down into things I can or cannot do as a seller. So that would be the second place to find me.
Perfect. We'll include links in the show notes. If you know someone who would enjoy this conversation, get value out of this conversation, please share it. Let Jen and I know via LinkedIn. You can also let me know via Twitter. Sales is a thinking process. Business is a thinking process. Life is a thinking process. How are you thinking differently about your process?